Gentlemen, ladies, and anyone in between, I welcome you all. Now, it's been a long winter. Spring has finally sprung. The rivers are stocked, and the trout are about as dumb as they're going to be all year round. And all you parents out there can finally stop fighting that losing battle of trying to pry that Xbox controller out of your kids' hands, because it's finally trout season. Now, let me ask you guys a question. How many of you out there hate line twist, hate retying all day long? You cast out, you do a drift, you hang up, you break off, wash, rinse, repeat. Now, the rigging methods I'm going to show you today are going to help you become more efficient with your time spent on the water. You'll get hung up less, you'll break off less, and you'll spend less time combating issues caused by line twist. The end result meaning less time screaming and cursing, less time retying, and more time fishing, which means more opportunities to put fish on your stringer. Now, the best thing about these rigging methods I'll be showing you today, they're very simple, and I'm willing to bet everybody out there already has everything they're going to need. So let's go ahead and get started. Now, first things first, it's worth mentioning it's 2018. If you're in the market for a new reel, please don't go out and buy one of those 500 size reels. Half of them weigh more than this reel here. This is a sized 2000 Daiwa Tatula LT, and it weighs 6 ounces. The benefit you get out of a larger reel: larger diameter spool, which means less line memory coming off, less coils to deal with going through the guides, and because it's larger, it requires fewer rotations to move that lure the same distance, and fewer rotations means less line twist. That is the #1 way to really cut down on issues caused by line twist. Now, onto the rigging. Now, using these powerbait mice tails as an example, and the reason being they're one of the most popular baits on earth, if you didn't know that already. They are very effective for trout. It's almost like using a salmon egg and a mealworm combination, and it's all in one. Now, most guys out there go ahead and take the hook and just poke it through just like that, and that's how they fish it. They try to get it centered so it doesn't twist up their line, etc., but they leave that hook point fully exposed. Other guys out there kind of get a little bit fancier. They go down the middle and out the back through here, like so, and look at that. Yeah, it's in line, it's not going to twist, but that hook point is fully exposed. The way I like to do it takes advantage of that big bulbous head, and if you look, I'm going to go in favoring one side drastically. I'm going to run it through down into the pink worm, and then I'm going to give that pink portion about half a turn, and then run that hook point through like so. What's going to happen here now, if you look, the worm is rigged perfectly straight. See how it runs like that? But if you look here, that hook point is protected by that bulbous head. This will prevent the bait, when you're bouncing that weight along the bottom and this is kind of moving around in the current, it'll prevent it from getting pushed down behind a rock, catching on that hook point. You'll drastically reduce the amount of times you get hung up just by changing how you rig this. And it still hooks up just as fine. Trout comes over, bites it, you ram a hook set, you're good to go. This, my friends, is a great way to rig these baits. And again, these are one of the most popular baits on the planet. They essentially mimic a salmon, egg, and mealworm combination, which a lot of guys throw. I happen to like these. They're spectacular. Now, next up, I'm going to show you guys a rig that just may make all those shad dart style and those trout magnet style jig heads obsolete. This, my friends, is what I call the Scrappy Doo rig. Now, why do I call it that? Makes perfect sense. I have a larger rig that I use for largemouth bass, smallmouth bass, even striped bass, called the Scooby-Doo rig. And this is scaled down for trout, so of course I'm going to call it the Scrappy-Doo rig. Patent pending. Now, what makes this rig unique versus all those small, shad dart, trout magnet style jig heads, is you have a weight that's away from the head of the hook. And if you look here, it's just a standard split shot, and the split shot's located behind the barb. Now, why is that important? Anytime you set the hook on a fish, they'll clamp down on it, and you're always trying to move the head of the jig or the head of the hook first. And if they're clamped down, if you don't smash that hook set, you can't move the hook point because their jaws are locked around that lead weight. So with this type of rig, you're going to get a much better hookup ratio. I've all but stopped using jig heads altogether. I think the last jig head I bought was back in 2009, maybe 2010. That's how effective this rig is in all sizes. Now, in addition to that, you have a lower center of gravity, so when you're retrieving this, it's never going to turn over. You can get this thing down low to the bottom and bottom trace with it, and you're not going to have the hook point getting into the dirty stuff. And in addition to that, when you bring this down low, say you have just a hook and a worm like this, and you have a split shot 2 or 3 feet up the line, when you're bottom bouncing tick, 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 tick with that weight, this is 2 feet behind in the current, and it's waving around, big deal, okay? With this rig, you're down in the stones and the gravel. If you have a floating worm, you're tying the line up here. Now, don't pay attention to this inline hook. I use inline. You can use your standard octopus hooks. You're tight to the hook, but you're not really tight to the weight. The weight's kind of dangling below, making contact, while this is kind of moving on its own separate. It really does create a unique action, especially if you're in an area that is in a tail-out pool, you're thrown behind a boulder. It's going to go down to the bottom, and it's going to sit right on the bottom, just wave around like this. That's what the fish are keyed in on 99% of the time. They're feeding on those aquatic insects that are behind the gravel, moving around, scurrying around the bottom. They're not moving around chasing worms that are, moving back and forth 3 feet, 2 feet, a foot off the bottom. If you're fishing like reservoirs and stuff like that, yeah, you want to get noticed. You want to have a marshmallow and a mealyworm hanging up, 2 feet off the bottom. This is different. This is for stock trout in the rivers or chasing aquatic insects. This is what they want to see. This will catch you more fish. And in addition to that, take your Scrappy Doo rig, take your floating soft plastic worm. It doesn't really have to be floating, but when it gets down to the bottom, it's a lot cooler when it is. And wacky rig it. Now, one of the coolest things about this rig, you see how that pivots? And when I show you how to make this rig, it's one of the most important parts of it. When you wacky rig with this weight's far away. The center of gravity is very far away from the resistance up here. Why is that important? Well, when it falls, this is going to collapse and move around, and this weight's far enough away that it can actually move off center. So when this moves this way, the weight's going to want to move back, but then this is going to recorrect and go this way. It creates one of the most ridiculous actions you'll ever see. And when it gets down to the bottom, there you go again with that line tie coming up, the weight's on the bottom, the worm's off the bottom, and it's moving around, dancing around freely. It is kill. I probably catch more 4-pound smallmouths in the state of New Jersey than anybody else because I fish the Scooby-Doo rigs exclusively in the warmer months. And in addition to all that, if you're fishing frog water, slack water, you take your floating worm, and if you have it even enough, you have to get the hang of this, you have to practice this. Let this sink to the bottom. The more buoyant side of the worm is going to go up. But if there's enough worm left on the other side, it's going to go against the bottom. You now have a Nico rig. And you don't have to worry about using the L weights, and it's trout sized. So there are so many ridiculous advantages to this rig. I'm not making it up. I legitimately haven't bought any jig heads in close to a decade ever since I switched to this rig. And in addition to that, if you're using, once again, a floating worm, and you have it like this, just like so, and you're hopping it on the bottom, jigging it along the bottom, hopping it, dropping it, hopping it, dropping it. The lead weight's gonna hit first. Everything's gonna kind of stop. Then this is gonna go boom down and then come back up like it's something feeding on the bottom. There's so many cool things that this rig does. And I know a lot of guys out there that are bass fishermen say, oh, it's just like a Jika rig or a jig rig. I've gone through probably 50 packs of different types of these kind of teardrop style tungsten weights with the actual line ties, and made rigs similar to this, made my own jig rigs, and I'll tell you what, this makes every one of those rigs obsolete. So with that all being said, let's move along. That's my Scrappy Doo rig, and I'm going to show you how to make it. Now if you look here, this is going to be everything you need to make this rig. You have something to cut line with, you have something to crimp split shots with, you have different options as far as how to hang the split shot. This is 8-pound test J-Braid X4, this is 4-pound test P-Line Halo, and this is 4-pound test Berkley Fireline. I like using Fireline because it handles well, it's kind of wiry, and it's easy to work with, and it shows up on camera. In addition to that, you have your hook and your split shot. You can use any size hook, any size split shot, but we're going after that 1/50th of an ounce trout magnet jig head. So we're going to be using a size 6 owner SSW. You can also use a size 6 Gamakatsu octopus. It is about 20% lighter than the SSW owner because this owner uses a heavier wire and your BB split shot. So for starters, you're going to take about 8 inches of line, and again, this is that 4-pound test Berkley fire line. You're going to double it over like so, and you want to make sure the tags are about as close as possible, because what you're going to do next is grab your hook, and you're going to take those 2 tag ends and insert them through the hook eye, starting on the side favoring the hook point, like so. Once you do that, before you pull it through, get a finger in between this loop here, because you don't want to have that loop close up. So what you're going to do next is take the 2 tag ends and pass them through the loop just like so. Now before you go any further, you don't want to pull this loop tight. You want to grab each one of the legs and pass it through the loop in that same direction 2 more times. I'm going to do the left side twice, and then I'm going to do the right side twice, because you want to keep them from crossing over one another, and this kind of makes it easier. I apologize, it's a little tricky to do on camera with my arms stretched out. You kind of lose sight a little bit. If you do it up close, it's real easy. Just like, come on. Almost had it. Just like so. So this is what you're left with. It's almost like a cat's paw or an offshore swivel knot. Now, what you're going to do next is gently snug it up. You don't want to really wrench it down tight. You want to have that little, I don't know, 1/4 inch of wraps, like so, because that's going to add a little bit of rigidity around the hook and prevent this from twisting around the main line, coming up and fouling on the hook. And what we're going to do now is form an overhand knot, but we're not going to cinch it up tight just yet, because we need to have it cinched up at a certain point. If you look here, we're going to go lay the entire knot down like so, and we're going to go and cinch it up right at around that hook bend, because again, what we want to do is when we add that split shot, we want that split shot to be below the barb. We don't want that split shot to add any resistance when we set the hook. It's at this point we're going to grab our BB size split shot, or whatever size you want to use, and we're going to go ahead and lay it on the fire line. I'm going to kind of sort of close it up. We're not going to go all the way. And we're going to make sure that we can get that knot inside the split shot. Once we've gone ahead and done that, we're going to grab our pliers or forceps, whatever you want to use, and we're going to go ahead and close it down snug, just like so. And now we can go back with our cutters and trim those tag ends flush. And this is your final rig. Now feel free to make as many of these as you want, but before you fish them, before you tie on, make sure you go like this. See how I took the legs and spread them around that hook eye like so? When you do that and then tie your uni knot or whatever knot you're tying, there's no way that this is going to kind of come up and around. It kind of forces it to stay in that keeled position like so. And that's it. And again, you can use this, you can clip on another split shot. So if we form that knot at the base of the hook, you can probably add another BB if you wanted to go up. But again, this is a 1/50th of an ounce jig essentially that's going to hook up better. It's going to come through the water better. It's going to cast better. And I really want you guys to try this rig out. This is a spectacular way to fish. And you can scale it up. You can use it for bass. You can just use it for striped bass. You can use weedless hooks with it. You can use weedless wacky hooks with it. This is a Kitech. And again, this is better than a jig head. This is a 1/8 of an ounce, I think, or a 3/16 of an ounce tungsten. And I can get this down 20 feet. That's how it just goes straight down like so. Your line's here and the weight goes down, pulls it straight down. Beautiful rig. Now these next 3 rigs are very similar to what I used to use when I was steelheading. However, when you're trout fishing for stock trout, generally speaking, you're using spinning tackle. You're not using braided line and fly rods and chuck and ducking all day long. And these work very well. They keep your line stronger since you're not pinching split shots, weakening the line. And this top one here, if you're the kind of guy that likes using braid to a leader, this is an Alberto knot. and you use the tag end to tie 2 half hitches on the leader end that's usually clipped off, and then you attach a split shot and a worm weight, or however many split shots you want. That way when it's coming through the water and bouncing on the bottom, it's almost like a 3-way rig, and it's kind of built into your Alberto knot to begin with. You're just using that tag for something other than clipping. Next up, we have a rig that you can kind of pre-make, and you can pretty much add as many as you want in terms of split shots are concerned. And it's almost like what you would get with a slinky weight, only the benefit of this is it's a little less drag. You can custom tailor it as you go on the fly, and it's one of those things where you're not using, paracord or shoelaces, stuffing them with BBs and all that kind of stuff. Now, if you're in upstate New York, I don't know if you'd be able to get away with this versus a sheathed slinky weight. I don't know what the regulations, if they've changed over the years, but this is what I like to do. In addition to that, it's kind of thin through here, so if this does get hung up, you're more likely just to pull off weights than to actually break off or get snagged completely. And again, it performs just like you would get out of a slinky weight, and it's a little less bulky. Now this last one's very straightforward. You can make these up ahead of time. I love using dental floss because it actually gives you something you can see in the water. And in addition to that, instead of using fluorocarbon or braid or anything like that, for whatever reason, when you crimp a split shot on a floss knot, it seems to hold better. Now, what I'm going to do here, I'm going to take the loop side of the floss, bring it up through the swivel's eye, heading back towards the main line, or the main line side opposite of the hook. And we're just going to go ahead and just single time through the loop, boom, just like so. Now when it's tight, you have yourself a guaranteed keel, and again, you don't want to be pinching split shots on your leader. This is going to retain your strength. If you break off, if the weight gets hung up, it'll break off here. You're not going to break off your entire rig. And if your weights get hung up and they're pinched on your main line or your leader, when you get hung up on a weight and it pulls down the line, that entire length of leader is now compromised down to the hook. So you're going to have to cut off and retie anyway. So I really like using this. It comes through the water great. It gives you a little bit of almost like a sight indicator, because sometimes it's difficult if you're throwing mealworms or night crawlers. Sometimes you can't see where your lines are, and it could be in harm's way. Say you come up on a tree branch or something like that. Having that white dental floss as it's hopping and dropping on the bottom gives you something that you can actually see. And again, it's like a slinky weight, only it's made with stuff that you don't have. You don't have to sacrifice any shoelaces or paracord, and it's stuff you have lying around the house anyway. Now, with all that being said, for those of you that are still with me, I appreciate every second of every minute you guys spend here. And the last thing I want to do is waste anybody's time. I wouldn't have put this video out there if I didn't think it's more effective than what's currently available. And I've never seen anybody really talk about this. I know slinky weights exist. I know the Jika rig exists. But everything I showed you today is different, has its time and place, and is more effective. And I've put years and years and years and years on these rigs. I'm not the biggest stock trout kind of guy. I like chasing the big giant browns and the big wild fish, or the anadromous fish that move up and out of the lakes. So when I do get out and target stock trout, I have found that I've never seen anybody fish these rigs, and when I'm throwing them, I'm just slaying trout. And with all that being said, until next time, guys, tight lines, and I'll see you soon. You guys might think this is a big hook, but I'm not going for small fish. There's 22-inch smallmouth in here. Like that. This is a nice fish. I'm not budging him. I might have foul hooked something. I don't know how I could have foul hooked something.